Hey guys, I've seen a lot of people online talking about the binary trigger for the CZ Scorpion here, the Franklin Armory BFSIII, and that they've had various issues with it not firing a second shot. I've had this one in here for about 2,500 rounds now. It actually worked flawlessly for about first 1,500, maybe a little bit more, but then I started having the same issues as everyone else. I tore the trigger pack apart and I actually figured out what the issue is, and I believe I've solved it. So I just want to do a video here so I could share that knowledge with everyone else. First thing, obviously when working on a firearm, make sure it's clear. So magazine's out, chamber's clear. I'm going to go ahead and take the lower off of the gun. Just pull the pin out. I'm sure you've done this before. We can set the rest of the gun aside. And then we need to pull out the trigger pack. If you installed this binary trigger yourself, you've probably done this before, but just in case, it's pretty simple. You just got to take off the safety selector, pull the safety bar out, take off the lower screw there, and then the whole trigger pack comes right out. So start with the safety selector there on the right side, just a little Allen wrench. I believe it's a 50 thousandths Allen wrench. I might be mistaken on that though. Set that aside. Selector comes off and the safety bar pops right out. And we need to take off that lower screw. That is a 3mm Allen, I believe. Again, set that screw aside, and then the whole trigger pack pops out, and you can set your lower aside. So now that we've got our trigger pack out, I'll show you the different pieces here and what we're actually looking for. So we've got the sear here, the hooks on both ends. We've got the disconnector here, this guy, and then we've got this sliding piece right here. And that piece right there is actually what gives us our binary function, but it's also what gives us our shot cancel. Now the issue comes from the fact that this little guy is spring loaded, and you see right there how it's spring loaded. It springs back. There's a little spring right in here, and that guy actually gets worn out. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop this pin out, we're going to pull that spring out, we're going to stretch it out just to give it a little bit more force, and we're going to put it back together. I have tried searching online to see if I can find a good source for a replacement spring. I haven't found one yet. I did try a handful of different springs from Lee Spring. I couldn't find one in the right size that had enough force to it. They were all too weak. But stretching this one out has been successful for me. So what we need to do is there's a cross pin here. We're going to pop that guy out. We're going to take it from, if the trigger pack is facing away from you like it would be in the firearm, we're going to take the pin from left to right. I've just got a small pin punch here. I'm not sure the size. It doesn't take much. But you're just going to gently push that guy through. And so we're through the casing. We're going to push it through the sear there, and then we're going to push it through that sliding piece. You need to be careful because you are pushing, there's a spring in there. Once we're through there, we don't want to lose our disconnector here because there's a spring under that. Once we're through there, this guy will fall right out, and I just dropped the spring on the floor. But so we've got our sliding piece right there, and just set those down. And then we got this little tiny spring, and it sits in here just like that, and that pin that we popped is in here. So that spring actually acts against that pin, and it lets this sliding piece slide back and forth. I'm not sure if you saw it earlier when I was demonstrating the sliding that piece. It kind of snapped firmly back and forth, and you could hear it actually. And the issue comes from this spring not having enough force to actually make it snap back and forth. And under recoil, this guy will actually snap in the wrong direction against the spring, and that's actually how the shot cancel function of the binary activates. So basically, under recoil, the gun is self-activating the shot cancel feature. So again, we're just going to take this spring. I've already stretched this one out. You can kind of see it right in the middle. It's spaced out just a little bit. It doesn't take much, just a little bit of stretch. You want to be real careful that you don't stretch it too much, because if you get too aggressive with it, you'll end up screwing up the spring like this guy that I was messing with. You don't want to do that. You just want to stretch it just enough, give it a little bit more force. So, got that guy stretched out. While you got this out, I would recommend making sure this guy's nice and clean. Mine was pretty carboned up when I took it out. Again, I had several thousand rounds through it. I shoot with a suppressor, so it gets pretty dirty. But go ahead and clean it up. If you want, you can even polish the contact surfaces of this guy just a little bit. It's not really necessary. But this little tooth right here, I don't know if you can see, but I polished mine up a little bit, and it did seem to help it just a little bit. Doesn't take much. Be very careful. You don't want to take off too much material. Just smooth it out. Once you got that spring stretched out, you got the guy nice and cleaned up, you just set that spring back in there like that, and then set this guy back into our trigger pack. Now this part's a little tricky because this little tooth that I talked about polishing has to slide under our disconnector that I just popped out there. So if you accidentally pop out your disconnector like I just did, you got the disconnector spring sits down into the sear right there, and then this guy, disconnector sits right on top of it. It's got a little pocket there that goes over the spring, and then you slide your pin back through. Difficult for me to be real coordinated doing this on the camera. Okay, we got her back through. Okay, again, we get our spring for our sliding piece here, set it in this little pocket, and then you got to set this guy in place without losing that spring. And then you got to rock your disconnector back and get that tooth to slide under it. And it is kind of a tricky little process. It's actually easier to do this. It's easier and more difficult to do this by popping the pin out all the way. But if you do that, you do have to deal with your trigger spring there and resetting that guy, which can be kind of a pain. I do have the HBI reduced weight trigger spring in this trigger pack, and it does function well. So if that's something you're interested in doing, that might be a good thing to do right now as well. HBI has an excellent video on doing that. Okay, I've started to get this guy set back properly in place. Let's see if I can manage to finish the job. So again, we got the spring in there. We got to get this guy to sit down properly. And then you got to get the little tooth to pop under the disconnector. So let's see if I can get it on the video. Right there, you see the tooth is sticking out from in front of the disconnector. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of pressure backwards on our sliding piece. I'm going to rock our disconnector back and it slides right under there. Now we have to get that pin back in front of that spring. The easiest way to do that is going to be take your pin punch you had earlier, come back in from the left side of the trigger pack there in front of your spring and kind of hold your spring back and then work your pin through. And you get a couple different pieces you're trying to line up here, and that pin, it's got the spring tension of the trigger spring on it and it likes to fight you a little bit. So you kind of got to work a little bit. Make sure you're not bringing that pin across and pressing into that spring and squishing that spring. You got to get that pin in front of the spring. So that's what I'm trying to do here with that pin punch. Trying to kind of hold the spring back. Right there, my pin came most of the way through. I can take my punch out, and now I just got to get it to line up the other side of the disconnector there, and then the rest of the way through our trigger housing. And once you've done that, you can test this out. You should have a really nice snap noise, and you should see this guy move all the way back and forth when you manipulate it. So if you rock your disconnector back, you heard it snap, and it moved all the way. If I take my punch here and I pry on it, see how there's no more movement backward? When I was having issues with this, I would test that to snap it back, and it would not snap. It would just kind of go real gently. And it would also, once it kind of, that tooth got under the disconnector there, it would have another millimeter of movement probably that I could manually do. And this one, you see it snapped all the way to the end of its travel like it should. And then you can press forward on our sliding piece here, and you hear it snap back the other direction nice and cleanly. And again, we pull back on our disconnector, a nice snap, and it moved as far back as it's going to. That's it. You put your trigger pack back in your gun and it should be good to go. So to finish up, your trigger pack is just going to set back down into your housing, and you got to make sure both pins, both your main pin up here and your back pin, make sure they're fairly centered up. If they're hanging out one side or the other, it'll bind up and not want to go down in there properly. But so again, that guy just should set right down in there. And we're going to put our main screw back in the bottom there. Doesn't hurt to put a little bit of Loctite on that if you got it. If that guy backs out, you will experience malfunctions on your binary there. I have experienced that myself. And then we got to put our safety bar back in. This can be a little tricky, getting it back under the actual tooth there for where the safety selects. Sometimes you get to pry up on that bar that has the tooth a little bit and kind of finagle it around, but it'll snap back in there. And then we put our selector back on and put that little set screw on there. Again, it doesn't hurt to put a little bit of Loctite on this guy. I'm going to skip it for now, but I'll come back and do it later. And then we can put our lower back on our gun. So we're going to perform a function check here real quick. So I'm going to make sure the gun is clear. And then on safe, it does not fire. On semi, it does fire. Trigger resets, there is no second shot. And then on binary, we have a shot. And then we have our second shot. And then again, on binary, we have our first shot. And then we have our shot cancel by switching to semi, and the trigger resets properly. And that's it. Take it out to the range, make sure the binary works properly, but that should do it for you. Be safe, have fun. See you guys.